The audio crackles first, a metallic voice cutting through the patrol car's cabin. Adam 12, ranger at Liberty Park, reports that derelict vehicle, states the smell is just wrong. Officer Riley's boot hasn't even hit the gravel of the service road when it happens. Max, his 7-year-old Belgian Malinois partner, goes rigid in the back seat. It's not a bark. It's not a whine. It's a sudden, silent, absolute stillness. His muzzle lifts, nostrils flaring, tasting a single awful thread in the damp morning air. Riley's hand freezes on the door. He knows that stillness. The routine call is over. What did Max smell? We are about to find out. This is a story about the unshakable bond between an officer and his K9 and their hunt for justice. If you believe in that mission, and if you want to honor the work these partners do every day, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You don't want to miss what happens next. The call had come in at 07:12 a.m., just as the last of the fog was burning off the reservoir. Officer David Riley, 7th Adam 12, had been a cop for 28 years. He was 3 years from retirement, a man who had seen the city parks transition from places of picnics and Little League to grim, forgotten spaces where the bushes grew too thick and the lights were always broken. He hated park calls. They were almost always one of two things: bored teenagers or profound human misery. The dispatcher's voice, usually a monotone cadence of professional boredom, had a slight hitch. Adam 12, ranger at Liberty Park, reports that derelict vehicle we've had calls on. States the smell is just wrong. Just wrong. Not a dead animal. Not garbage. Not sewage. Just wrong. It was a civilian term, imprecise but deeply descriptive. It was the kind of term that made the hair on Riley's arms stand up. 10-4 dispatch, Riley had responded, his voice flat, betraying nothing. Adam 12 is en route. He guided the cruiser off the main asphalt and onto the gravel service road that wound its way to the park's isolated south quadrant. Liberty Park was one of the Eisenhower-era projects, built in the optimistic 1950s. It had a concrete boathouse, crumbling tennis courts, and acres of old-growth oak trees. It was the kind of place Riley had taken his own kids back when they were small. Now he wouldn't let them walk here alone in broad daylight. There it was, just past the abandoned concession stand, half hidden by overgrown sumac trees. It was an ice cream truck. Or it had been. It was a classic 1970s good humor model, its bodywork ravaged by rust, its tires flat and sinking into the soft earth. The once cheerful decals of cartoon penguins and smiling popsicles were peeling, faded into ghostly outlines by decades of sun and neglect. It listed to one side, looking like a forgotten broken toy. Riley slowed the cruiser to a crawl and stopped about 50 yards away. He was downwind. That was the first thing. He killed the engine. The sudden silence of the park was overwhelming. No traffic noise, no distant sirens, just the buzz of insects and the cry of a lone hawk circling overhead. He sat for a moment, just watching. This was the part of the job they didn't show in movies. The waiting. The observing. Looking for the thing that didn't belong. The truck itself didn't belong, but it had been there for at least 6 months, according to the Rangers. It was the new element that mattered. The smell. Riley's hand was on the door handle. He was about to step out, to make the slow, cautious approach he had made 1,000 times before, and that's when it happened. In the custom-fitted cage in the back, Max, his K9 partner, moved. Max was a 7-year-old Belgian Malinois, 90 pounds of coiled muscle, focused energy, and a nose that was 1,000,000 times more sensitive than Riley's. On patrol, Max was usually a picture of relaxed vigilance, his head resting on his paws, his ears swiveling to track the world. Now he was rigid. It wasn't the aggressive, lunging bark he used for a felony stop. It wasn't the excited yip he used when he found a stash of narcotics. It was a change so subtle that a civilian would have missed it. Max went from a resting dog to a statue in half a second. His head lifted, his body locked, his ears pinned forward, his muzzle raised slightly and his nostrils flared, tasting the air, pulling in molecules from 50 yards away through the closed car door. A low guttural vibration started deep in his chest. Not a growl, a huff, a scent alarm. Riley's hand froze on the door. His blood went cold. "What is it, Max?" he murmured, his eyes scanning the tree line, his hand moving automatically from the door handle to the clip of his radio. Max didn't move. He just stared, not at the truck but at the air coming from the truck. Riley knew that alert. He had trained for it. He had seen it only twice before in the real world. Once was a missing hiker case that ended in a ravine. The other was a drug house basement. It was the smell of death, specifically human decomposition. The routine call was over. This was now a scene. A 10:57, a homicide. Slowly, carefully, Officer Riley pushed his door open. The ding-ding-ding of the open door alarm felt like a siren in the silence. He clicked it off. He stepped out onto the gravel. The morning air was damp, heavy with the smell of wet leaves and pine. And beneath it, now that he was outside, he could smell it. It was faint, vile, a sharp chemical sweetness layered over a thick coppery rot. It was the smell of a failed freezer. It was the smell of spoiled meat and something else. Something uniquely, awfully human. Riley stood by his door, his partner now standing silently in the back, his entire body focused, waiting for a command. "Easy, boy," Riley said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't reach for his weapon. He reached for his radio. This was no longer an approach. It was a containment. Every footprint, every broken twig, every fiber of evidence between him and that rusted peeling ice cream truck was now sacred ground. 7 Adam 12, he said into the radio, his voice perfectly calm, perfectly professional. "I'm at the derelict vehicle in Liberty Park." He took one more look at the truck, its cheerful, faded penguin mocking him. "Dispatch, roll me a supervisor and get me the detectives." Officer Riley's voice, calm and clipped, hung in the dead air. "Dispatch, roll me a supervisor and get me the detectives." The dispatcher's reply was equally professional, a voice trained to handle panic with procedure. 10-4-7 Adam 12, supervisor and detectives are en route. And then silence. This, Riley thought, was always the worst part, the agonizing, drawn-out silence after the call for help. But before the sirens, the cavalry was coming, but in police work, en route could mean 7 minutes or 20. In that vacuum, he was the primary. This was his scene, his responsibility. He stood by his open patrol door, the incessant ding-ding-ding, now a maddening rhythm in the quiet park. He reached in and killed it. In the back, Max was no longer static. The huffing scent alarm had transitioned into a low, impatient whine. He was pacing now, a tight two-step circle in his kennel, his body a loaded spring. For a canine like Max, a Malinois bred for high-drive work, the scent was the puzzle. The source was the reward. He had the puzzle, and he was now desperate for the reward. Riley knew he couldn't just wait by the car. The detectives would need a confirmation. They would need to know exactly where to focus. Standing 50 yards back and saying the dog smelled something wasn't enough. He had to let Max pinpoint the source. He had to confirm. "All right, Max," Riley said, his voice a low rumble. He moved to the rear door of the SUV. This was their ritual. The click of the handle. The pop of the kennel latch. The jingle of the harness. Riley grabbed Max's work harness, a heavy-duty nylon rig with a thick leather handle on the back. This was different from the simple collar Max wore on patrol. This was the work uniform. As Riley slipped it over his partner's head and buckled it, Max's entire demeanor changed. The whining stopped. The pacing focused. He became a tool of pure, focused intent. He knew this game. "Easy," Riley said, clipping a 6-foot leather lead to the harness. "Easy, boy." Max exited the vehicle, his paws landing silently on the gravel. He didn't bark. He didn't pull, not yet. He stood at Riley's left leg, quivering, his entire body vibrating with restrained energy. His eyes were locked on the ice cream truck. "Okay," Riley said, his voice dropping into the command tone. "Show me." It was as if a switch had been thrown. Max surged forward, the leather lead instantly snapping taut. Riley, expecting it, braced and moved with him. This was not a walk. It was a controlled drag. Max's nose was vacuuming the ground, pulling in the scent cone, tracing it back to its origin. Riley's job was simple. Read the dog and keep his own eyes up. He scanned the area as they moved, his boots crunching on the gravel path. His brain, trained by 3 decades of experience, was automatically cataloging. No fresh tire tracks besides his own. Ground is damp, holds impressions well. No obvious drag marks. Trash can near the concession stand is overflowing. A good spot for a suspect to ditch a weapon. He filed it all away. But Max wasn't interested in the trash can. He wasn't interested in the bushes or the driver's side door of the truck, which hung slightly ajar. A rookie K9 might have been drawn to the cab, the place where humans sit. Max ignored it completely. He didn't even turn his head. The scent wasn't coming from there. He also ignored the smashed-out service window, its jagged glass smiling a broken grin. The smell was older, more contained than that. Max was pulling hard now, his powerful shoulders driving him forward. He pulled Riley right past the front of the truck, past the cheerful, peeling penguin logo. He was heading for the back. Here, the smell was stronger. Even Riley's dull human nose could pick it up clearly now. The cloying chemical sweetness of antifreeze mixed with the unmistakable metallic tang of spoiled blood and rot. It was a smell that burrowed into your sinuses and stayed there. It was the smell of a secret gone bad. The ice cream truck was backed up almost against a thicket of blackberry bushes. At the rear were two heavy industrial-grade freezer doors, secured by a single enormous, rust-covered padlock. Max stopped directly in front of them. He shoved his nose deep into the rubber seam between the two doors, inhaling so hard he snorted. The scent pouring from that crack must have been overwhelming, a physical blow. Then he gave his final indication. It was frantic, urgent, not the passive sit he used for narcotics. This was a human remains alert. He reared up, his front paws slamming against the metal door. Whumph! He pawed aggressively, his claws scraping uselessly against the painted steel. Scrape, scrape, he barked, one sharp, concussive huff that meant it is here. And then, as he was trained, he sat. He planted his backside on the gravel, looked up at the rusted padlock, and then looked back at Riley. His eyes were wide and tense. I found it, boss. Now open it. Riley let out the breath he'd been holding. Good boy, Max, good boy, got him. He gave a slight tug on the leash. Okay, back. Max obeyed, backing up a few feet, though his eyes never left the lock. Riley pulled his radio from his shoulder. He kept his partner on a short leash, a safe distance away. The area around the doors was now the epicenter. 7 Adam 12 to dispatch, he said. Go ahead, Adam 12. I've got a confirmed K9 alert, Riley said, his voice flat professional. Source is the rear freezer compartment of the vehicle. It's secured by a heavy padlock. Be advised, my inbound units will need the bolt cutters. 10-4, Adam 12, bolt cutters requested. Riley clicked the radio off. He and Max stood watch. A man and his dog, partners in a terrible discovery. The silence of the park returned, heavier this time. Riley stared at the lock. It was old, a thick shackled master lock from a hardware store. Behind that lock, behind that rusted metal, lay the answer to the just wrong smell. And he knew, with the kind of bone-deep certainty that came from 28 years on the job, that whatever was in that freezer, it had been waiting a very long time. The silence that fell after Officer Riley's transmission was heavier than the damp morning air. There was only the sound of his own breathing, the occasional soft huff from Max, and the distant, indifferent caw of a crow. Riley and Max stood as statues, guardians of a rusted tomb. This was the part of the job that ate at you. Not the chase, not the confrontation, but the wait. The agonizing, clock-dripping minutes after you've identified the monster, but before you're allowed to look it in the face. Riley's eyes drifted from the heavy, rust-caked padlock to the truck's peeling decals. There was a cartoon penguin, its belly a little too round, wearing a blue bow tie. Next to it was a strawberry popsicle with cartoon eyes and a wide, frozen smile. These were images from his own childhood. They were the symbols of summer, of scraped knees, of the cicada's drone in the late afternoon, of running barefoot on hot pavement toward the sound of that tinkling, magical music. The ice cream truck was a secular sanctuary. It was joy. This was a violation. It was a desecration of that memory. Someone had taken this symbol of childhood innocence and turned it into a sepulcher. It made Riley's stomach tighten, a cold, hard knot of anger replacing the initial shock. This wasn't just a 1057, this was personal. He thought of his own grandkids, of their faces lighting up when they heard the jingle-jingle of the truck in his own quiet suburban neighborhood. The thought of this thing, being associated with that memory made him feel ill. Max, sensing the shift in his handler, pressed the side of his head against Riley's leg. A simple grounding touch. I'm here, boss. Riley placed his hand on Max's head, his thumb rubbing the familiar space between his partner's ears. Good boy, he murmured. Just a few more minutes. In the far distance, a sound began to separate itself from the city's ambient hum. A siren. It was the faint rising wail of his backup. But just as the sound began to grow, it was cut off. That was professional. That was his sergeant. You don't roll in hot lights and sirens to a contained scene. You don't advertise your arrival. You don't disturb the evidence, and you don't spook a potential suspect who might still be lingering in the woods. 2 minutes later, a patrol car, a black and white just like his, unched slowly up the gravel service road. It was followed by a dark, unmarked Ford Crown Victoria, the sergeant's car. The first car parked 50 yards back, establishing the outer perimeter. The Crown Vic pulled up just behind Riley's own SUV. The door opened and Sergeant Frank Miller stepped out. Miller was a cop's cop, 25 years on the job, a face like a worn-out catcher's mitt, and eyes that had seen everything twice. He and Riley had come up from the academy together, though Miller had taken the promotion track while Riley had stayed on the street, preferring the company of a K-9 to a desk. Miller didn't rush. He walked over, his eyes scanning the truck, the ground, the tree line before they landed on Riley. "What do you got, Dave?" His voice was low, gravelly. "It's in there, Frank," Riley said, nodding toward the freezer doors. "Max is 100%. He went right for it. Aggressive. Final alert for human remains." Miller looked at Max, who was sitting at perfect attention, his gaze still locked on the doors. A veteran K-9 like Max didn't make mistakes. A veteran cop like Miller knew it. "Smells bad," Miller observed, taking a slight step back as the wind shifted. "You confirmed it's locked?" "Affirmative. Heavy padlock." "Detectives are about 10 minutes out," Miller said. "But we're not waiting. This is exigent. We've got a body in a box. We open it." Just then, a third car arrived, another black and white. A young officer, barely out of his probationary rookie phase, stepped out. His name was Johnson, and he looked pale, his eyes wide. He was carrying the Rabbit, the heavy 4-foot-long red bolt cutters. "Sarge?" Johnson asked, his voice a little too high. "Bring 'em here, kid," Miller grunted. Johnson hurried over, the cutters clanging together. He held them out to the sergeant. Miller looked at Riley. It was Riley's find. "His scene. You want to do the honors, Dave?" Riley nodded. "I'll do it." He handed Max's leash to the young officer. "Johnson, hold him. Short leash. Don't let him crowd me." Yes, sir." Johnson took the leash, his knuckles white. Max, recognizing he was being handed off, looked back at Riley, confused, but he obeyed. Riley took the bolt cutters from Johnson. The tool was heavy, cold steel. He stepped up to the back of the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel. The smell was overwhelming now. It was a physical presence, a wall of decay that made his eyes water. He breathed through his mouth, tasting the putrid air on his tongue. He stared at the lock. It was a thick, shackled master lock, its body covered in a crust of orange rust. He positioned the hardened steel jaws of the cutters around the shackle. He gripped the handles. He was aware of Miller standing back, of the rookie holding his dog, of the entire park holding its breath. He squeezed. The rust flaked off. The steel of the shackle resisted for a second. Riley planted his feet, put his weight into it, and squeezed again, hard. Snap. The sound was shockingly loud in the silence. It echoed off the trees, a sharp metallic crack like a gunshot. The heavy lock fell, hitting the gravel with a dull thud. The doors were free. Officer Riley dropped the cutters. He paused, his hand hovering over the heavy rubber handle of the freezer door. He took a single deep breath, bracing himself, and then he pulled. Officer Riley's hand gripped the heavy insulated rubber handle. It was cold, damp with the morning mist. He pulled. The door didn't budge. The old rubber seal, fused by decades of rust and frozen moisture, held fast. "It stuck," he grunted, planting his boot against the truck's bumper for leverage. "Give it hell." "Dave," Sergeant Miller said from behind him. Riley reset his grip. He gave a sharp, violent yank. The seal tore open with a sound like ripping canvas, a long, sickening shriek. It was followed by a faint hiss as the vacuum was broken. And then the smell hit them. It was no longer the faint, insidious trace it had been from 50 yards away. It was no longer the seeping, chemical-laced odor at the door seam. This was the source. It was a physical blow. A solid, staggering wave of putrescence that washed over them. It was the concentrated, pressurized stench of years of decay, suddenly liberated. It was the smell of spoiled milk, rotted meat, and that coppery, acidic tang of human decomposition, all mixed with the sharp, artificial sweetness of failed coolant. The rookie, Johnson, gagged instantly. He doubled over, turning his head away, his hand clamped over his mouth. Even Sergeant Miller, a man who'd seen it all, cursed a low Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, as he pulled the collar of his shirt up over his nose. Riley, closest to the source, took the brunt of it. Bile, hot and acidic, rose in the back of his throat. He fought the urge to vomit. He had trained for this. You breathe through your mouth. You focus. You compartmentalize. Johnson maintained that dog, he ordered, his voice strained, tasting the air as he spoke. The interior of the freezer was a dark, frosty cavern. Riley unclipped his heavy-duty flashlight from his belt, thumbing it on. The powerful LED beam cut into the gloom. What he saw at first was chaos. The freezer's system had clearly failed years ago, perhaps multiple times. The entire contents had melted and refrozen into a single, solid, grotesque block. It was a tomb of sugar. Riley's light played over the surface. He could see the waxy wrappers of melted bomb pops, their red, white, and blue colors bleeding together. He saw the wooden sticks of dozens of popsicles, suspended in a block of frosty brown sludge. He saw the faint outlines of cartoon-faced ice cream bars, their chocolate eyes long since dissolved. It was a disgusting, sticky mess. But it wasn't the source of the K-9 alert. Max wasn't trained to find spoiled ice cream. "Stay back, kid," Miller warned Johnson, who was peering, pale-faced, over Riley's shoulder. Max, however, was no longer sitting. The moment the door opened, the dog went frantic. The concentrated scent hit him like a drug. He was straining against Johnson's grip, choking himself on his harness, his paws digging into the gravel. He wasn't just alerting. He was trying to get inside. "Riley," Miller said, his voice tense. "The dog, I see it," Riley said. Max wasn't focused on the mass of melted ice cream. His muzzle was pointing past it down toward the bottom right corner of the chest freezer. "It's under that," Riley said. His own focus narrowing, he leaned in, his head and shoulders disappearing into the freezing, foul-smelling darkness of the truck. The cold was intense, a dry, freezer-burned cold that stung his nostrils even through the stench. He aimed his flashlight beam where Max was indicating. At first he saw nothing. Just the frosty, metal-lined bottom of the freezer. "Wait," he murmured. He angled the light. There, tucked beneath the solid block of frozen confections, was a dark shape. It wasn't a box of ice cream. It was a bundle. It looked like a heavy industrial-grade plastic tarp or perhaps a heavy-duty contractor garbage bag. It was dark green or black and brittle with frost. It had been wedged into the corner, as if someone had thrown it in first, before piling the boxes of ice cream on top of it as a grotesque, juvenile camouflage. The bundle itself was sealed with duct tape, the silver adhesive now gray and peeling in the cold. But at one corner the plastic had torn, perhaps from the weight of the ice above it, or from the cycle of freezing and thawing. It was a small, 3-inch tear. Riley focused the tight beam of his flashlight on that single, dark opening. He saw something pale. He leaned closer, his breath pluming in the frigid air. It wasn't ice. It wasn't a melted popsicle. It wasn't plastic. It was organic. His light illuminated 5 small, delicate shapes. Fingers. He was looking at a human hand. It was small, pale, and waxy, the skin puckered by the cold and moisture. It was unmistakably a hand protruding from the torn plastic. Riley felt his heart stop. He didn't move. He just stared, his training battling his humanity. Don't touch it. Don't breathe on it. Don't disturb a single thing, and then his flashlight beam settled on the 3rd finger. There, glinting dully in the high-powered beam, was a simple, old-fashioned, gold wedding band. Riley recoiled as if he'd been punched, stumbling back out of the freezer, nearly falling over Sergeant Miller. "Dave." "What is it?" Miller grabbed his arm. Riley didn't speak. He just pointed. He couldn't find his voice. Miller, his face a grim mask, took the flashlight from Riley's trembling hand. He leaned in, aimed the beam at the corner, and held it there for 3 solid seconds. He pulled back out, his face pale under his weathered skin. He looked at Riley. He looked at the rookie. "Get on the radio, Johnson. Right now." Miller's voice was a low, dangerous command. "Get the coroner. Get the full CSI unit. Get everybody." He turned back to Riley, handing him the flashlight. "It's a hand," Riley finally whispered, the words feeling dry and alien in his mouth. I know, Dave, Miller said, his voice heavy. I saw the ring. A cold, heavy silence descended. It lasted only a second, but it felt like an hour. The three officers, the veteran, the sergeant, and the rookie, stood frozen, framed against the grotesque backdrop of the ice cream truck. Sergeant Miller was the first to move. He broke the spell, his professionalism slamming back into place like a steel door. "Johnson," he barked, his voice a sharp crack in the silence. The rookie visibly flinched, his face the color of spoiled milk. "Sarge? Did you make that call?" "Yes, Sarge." "They're en route. CSI, me, detectives. Good. Now get out of here." Miller pointed, not at the patrol car but at the gravel service road 50 yards back. "Go to the entrance of this road. Establish a hard perimeter. Nobody gets in. Nobody. Not a park ranger, not a news van, not another cop unless I clear them personally. This is my scene. You understand me, son?" "Yes, sir." "A hard perimeter. Nobody." Johnson stammered, grateful for a simple task, desperate to get away from the smell and the sight. He turned and practically ran back to his black and white. Miller turned to Riley. The anger in his face was gone, replaced by a weary, grim resolve. "Dave," Riley hadn't moved. He was still staring at the open freezer door, his flashlight held uselessly at his side. The image of the hand, that small, pale hand, was burned onto his retinas. The ring, he kept seeing the glint of the gold ring. "Dave," Miller said, sharper this time. Riley blinked, his head snapping toward his sergeant. "Yeah, Frank, I'm here." "You did good," Miller said, a rare compliment. "You and the dog. Now your part in this is done. This belongs to the detectives now." Riley nodded, but his body felt heavy, disconnected. "Listen to me," Miller said, grabbing his arm, forcing eye contact. "You're the primary. You're the witness. Your report is the foundation of this whole damn case. I want it perfect. Go back to your car, sit down. Write everything." "Frank, I can—" "No," Miller cut him off, his voice firm. "You're too close. You found it. Go. Write your report now. While every detail is hot. The dispatcher's exact words, the smell, the way the dog alerted. Every single thing. That's an order." Riley looked at Max. The dog was still straining, confused, whining. He had alerted. The door was open. Why wasn't he getting his reward? Why wasn't he being allowed to get to the source? Riley knew this was the hardest part of canine handling. Max didn't understand evidence preservation. He only understood his job, and he hadn't been given the all clear. "Go on," Miller said, softer this time. "Take care of your partner. Get him some water. Get him clear of the smell. We'll take it from here." Riley gave a short, sharp nod. "Okay, Sarge, we're clear." He tugged on Max's leash. "Max, heel." The command was iron. Max, despite his high-drive confusion, obeyed instantly. He fell back into step at Riley's left leg. Though he kept looking back at the truck, his body still tense. The walk back to the SUV was the longest 50 yards of Riley's life. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving a hollow, shaky feeling in its place. The world seemed to rush back in, the sound of the birds, the rustle of leaves, the smell of the damp earth. But he couldn't get the stench of the freezer out of his sinuses. He opened the rear door of the SUV. Max jumped into his kennel without a command, but immediately turned, staring at Riley, his eyes asking the question why. "Good boy, Max," Riley said, his voice thick. "Good boy. It's over. Genug. Enough." He gave his partner the German command that meant work is finished. Max seemed to deflate, the tension leaving his body. He lay down, his head on his paws, but his eyes never left Riley. Riley shut the kennel, grabbed the department-issued first aid kit, and took out a plastic water bottle. He poured some into a collapsible bowl and offered it to Max, who lapped at it gratefully. Then Riley walked to the driver's side of his own car and sat down. The familiar smell of vinyl, old coffee, and dog was a comfort. He sat for a full minute, his hands on his knees, just breathing. He could feel the shakes starting in his fingertips. Compartmentalize, he told himself. Do the job. He powered on his dash-mounted Toughbook laptop. The screen flared to life, illuminating the dim cabin. He opened a new report template, case number, pending. Reporting officer, Riley D. Badge 714, K912, time of calls 0712, he began to type. He wrote about the dispatcher's call. The just wrong smell. He wrote about Max's initial alert, the stillness before they even left the car. He described the track, how Max bypassed the cab and the service window heading directly for the freezer. He detailed the type of alert, the aggressive pawing, the bark, the final seated indication. As he typed, the details became hyper-clear, playing back in his mind like a film. The rusty flake of the padlock, the shripe of the rubber seal, the cloud of his own breath in the freezer's cold, and the hand. He stopped typing. He stared at the blank screen, observed small pale hand appearing to be female, protruding from dark-colored tarp. He thought of the ring. A simple gold band, just like the one his wife Mary wore, the one she hadn't taken off in 35 years. This wasn't just a Vic. This wasn't some gangbanger or overdose. This was someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's daughter. Someone had taken her, violated her, and sealed her in a child's ice cream truck with duct tape and melted bomb pops. The cold anger from before returned. Sharp and pure, a new sound broke his focus. Sirens, not cut off this time. The cavalry was here. He looked in his rearview mirror. The gravel service road was suddenly awash in flashing blue and red lights. 2 unmarked detective sedans, a big white CSI van, the white whale, and finally, the black windowless van of the medical examiner. The scene exploded from silence into quiet, controlled chaos. Doors opened. People in suits, the detectives, stepped out, their faces grim. White-suited CSI techs began unloading silver cases, tripods, and floodlights. A detective, a young guy named Kowski, whom Riley vaguely recognized, spotted him and walked over. Kowski rapped on the window with his knuckle. Riley powered down the glass. "Officer Riley, your primary?" Kowski asked. He was all business. "That's right," Riley said. "Talk to me. Give me the short version." Riley took a breath, switching back into cop mode. 0712 call from Parks. Suspicious smell. My K9 alerted on the vehicle from 50 yards. Led me to the rear freezer. Locked with a padlock. Sarge Miller and I breached it. Inside, under a mass of frozen product, a body, or part of one, I observed a hand. Appears to be a female, wearing a wedding ring. Kowski's eyes sharpened at the last detail. "A ring, okay," he nodded. "Stay here. Finish your report. The ME's office will take her. We'll take the victim. We'll be canvassing. We'll need your full statement back at the precinct." "Roger that," Riley said. Kowski nodded and turned away, already barking orders to his partner. Riley watched as the CSI techs, now fully suited, began their slow, meticulous approach to the ice cream truck. They moved like astronauts in a hostile environment, which Riley thought wasn't far from the truth. The focus had shifted. The discovery was over. The long, slow, grinding work of finding justice had just begun. Officer Riley sat in his cruiser, the driver's side door open, one boot resting on the gravel. The adrenaline from the breach had faded, leaving behind the familiar metallic taste of a bad scene. The park was no longer quiet. It was now a hive of controlled, methodical activity, bathed in the flashing rhythmic pulses of red and blue lights that reflected silently off the trees. The cavalry had arrived, and with them, they had brought the machine. Riley watched as the CSI team, the White Whale unit, got to work. These weren't cops in the traditional sense. They were scientists. They emerged from their massive, sterile white van already suited up in full-body Tyvek suits, hoods, masks, and booties. They looked like astronauts preparing to step onto a hostile alien world. In a way, Riley thought they were. They didn't rush the truck. They moved with a painful, agonizing slowness. First, the floodlights went up, bathing the ice cream truck in a harsh, artificial glare that chased away the morning shadows. Then the tripods. The photographer's .1 tech carrying a camera with a massive lens began the grid. He photographed everything before a single piece of evidence was touched. He photographed the ground. He photographed the gravel where Riley and Miller had stood. He photographed the cut padlock that Riley had tossed aside. He photographed the handle Riley had pulled. Another tech was working with lasers, mapping the scene in 3D. A third was methodically placing small, numbered yellow evidence markers on the ground, seemingly at random. Riley knew it wasn't random. A cigarette butt, a bottle cap, a single muddy footprint that didn't match their own. Everything was a clue. This was their world, a world of fibers, trace DNA, and spatter patterns. It was a sharp, sterile contrast to Riley's own work, which was visceral, instinctual, and based on the ancient, primal sense of his dog. Max was quiet in the back of the SUV. He knew his job was done. He had found the thing. Now the humans would take over. The two detectives, Kowski and his partner, a quiet, older detective named Perez, stood apart. They weren't in the science bubble. They were the conductors. Kowski was on his phone, his voice a low, hard monotone. Perez was talking to Sergeant Miller, his small notebook out, his pen scratching across the page. They were the storytellers, Riley thought. The CSI techs would give them the what, but Kowski and Perez had to find the why and the who. Finally, a different vehicle crunched up the gravel road. The medical examiner's van. It was a black, windowless Chevy, professional and discreet. A woman stepped out, Dr. Aris. She was all business, her face set in a look of professional neutrality. She conferred briefly with Kowski, then pulled on her own gloves and mask and approached the back of the truck. She was the only one by law allowed to touch the victim. Riley watched from his car. He saw the summit at the back of the truck. Kowski, the law, the CSI lead, the science, and Dr. Aris, the victim. They aimed their flashlights into the dark, frosty tomb. Riley could see them talking, see their heads shaking. He knew exactly what the problem was. The body wasn't in the freezer. It was part of the freezer. The victim was fused, frozen solid, into the grotesque block of melted ice cream, plastic wrappers, and wooden sticks. Any attempt to thaw the scene here in the field would be a disaster. It would destroy all trace evidence, wash away fibers, and contaminate the body. Any attempt to chip her out was even worse, a medieval act that would destroy the body itself and any evidence of a murder weapon or cause of death. Dr. Aris was emphatic. Riley could see her gesturing, her meaning clear even from 50 yards away. I can't clear this body. Not here. Kowski pinched the bridge of his nose. He took a deep breath, then got back on his phone. Riley heard the new order barked into the receiver. Yeah, this is Kowski, homicide. I'm at Liberty Park, South Service Road. I need a flatbed tow truck. A big one. No, we're not moving a car. We're moving the whole damn crime scene. It took another 30 agonizing minutes. A massive yellow flatbed truck, the kind used for hauling tractors, groaned its way backward down the narrow service road. The process was slow. The CSI team documented the truck's position, the state of its flat tires, the angle it was listing. Then, the heavy-duty winch cables were attached. With a groan of stressed metal and the high-pitched whine of the hydraulic winch, the entire ice cream truck, the rusted, peeling tomb, was slowly, carefully dragged out of the mud and onto the flatbed. The tow truck driver, a civilian, his face pale and his eyes wide, strapped it down with heavy yellow nylon bands. Riley watched the entire surreal spectacle. He watched as they pulled a heavy black tarp over the entire truck, hiding the cheerful, obscene penguin from view. Okay, Kowski said, walking back to Riley's cruiser. His face was like stone. Report done? Riley pointed to his laptop. Just about. All the key points are in. Good. Kowski looked past Riley at the flatbed as it began its slow, careful journey out of the park. It would be taken to the ME's secure bay, a refrigerated, sterile garage known to cops as the Tomb, where Dr. Aris and her team could thaw the entire block of evidence under controlled laboratory conditions. That's her, Kowski said almost to himself, the woman with the ring. Heading to the ME's office in a goddamn ice cream truck, he snapped his focus back to Riley. You and the dog. You're not done! Riley looked up, surprised. Detective? We've got nothing, Kowski said, his voice a low growl. No witnesses. No ID, no weapon. All we got is a smell in a locked freezer. You're the one who got the call. You're the one who was here first. He tapped the roof of Riley's car. You're with us. We're going to canvass this park. We're going to find the ranger who called this in. We're going to talk to every homeless guy, every jogger, and every bird watcher in a 2-mile radius. He gave Riley a hard look. You and Max found her. Now you're going to help us find out who she was. The roar of the flatbed's diesel engine faded, leaving a sudden ringing silence in its wake. The ice cream truck was gone. All that remained was an ugly, rectangular scar in the mud where it had rested, and a perimeter of yellow police line do not cross tape, already fluttering in the slight morning breeze. The harsh flashing red and blue lights were gone. replaced by the natural, dappled sunlight of the park. But the air felt poisoned, contaminated. Officer Riley stood next to his cruiser, Max sitting patiently at his heel. The dog's work was done, but the handler's was just beginning. Detective Kowski, the lead, slammed his car door shut. He'd been on the phone for 20 minutes, coordinating the tow, the ME, and the DA's office. He walked over, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened, his face a mask of grim focus. He was a shark that had just smelled blood. "All right," Kowski said, not to anyone in particular. "The lab rats have their toy. They'll spend the next 48 hours thawing that thing out like a goddamn Thanksgiving turkey. Dr. Eris will call us when she has something. Until then, we've got nothing." He turned to his partner, Perez, who was quietly taking notes in a small spiral-bound pad. "Perez, you and I hit the ranger station. We find the guy who made the 911 call. Ranger Jerry Clark," Perez said, not looking up from his notes. "I've got his name from the dispatch log." "Good," Kowski grunted. "Riley, detective, you and Max are with us. You're the primary. You found her. Witnesses feel better talking to a uniform, and they love the dog." "You're our good cop." Riley just nodded. He didn't mind the label. It was true. A K-9 officer often walked the line between patrol and public relations. Right now, he'd use any tool he had. "Let's go," Kowski said, and started walking. The three men and the dog moved away from the crime scene, walking in formation down the gravel path toward the park's main office. It was a classic good cop, bad cop setup, though in this case, it was Shark Notebook K-9. The park ranger station was a small, 1950s-era brick building near the main entrance, smelling of old coffee, damp boots, and cheap disinfectant. A bulletin board by the door was covered in curled, sun-faded flyers, missing calico cat, summer camp sign-ups 2023, and a stark warning about coyotes. Inside, a man in his late 60s wearing the green and tan uniform of the Park Service was sitting behind a metal desk. He looked pale. He stood up the moment they walked in. "Officers," he said, his voice shaky. "I'm Jerry Clark. I'm the one who called." "Did you find what that smell was?" Kowski flashed his badge, his eyes hard. "Detective Kowski, homicide. This is Detective Perez. You know Officer Riley." Jerry's face went white at the word homicide. He looked past Kowski to Riley. "Officer, oh God, it was a person, wasn't it?" Riley stepped forward, putting himself between the nervous ranger and the intense detective. "Mr. Clark, I'm Officer Riley. This is my partner, Max." At the mention of his name, Max's ears perked up and he gave a low, friendly woof. Jerry's eyes immediately went to the dog, his posture relaxing just a fraction. He reached out a trembling hand. "He's beautiful." "A Malinois?" "Yes, sir," Riley said, letting Max lean in for a brief pat. "He's the one who found the source." "Jerry," Kowski interrupted, his voice sharp, impatient. "The dispatch log says you called at 0712. Why then?" "Why not yesterday?" Jerry pulled his hand back from Max, his attention snapping back to the detective. I should have, maybe. But I thought it was a deer. A poacher's dump. We get it all the time. The smell. It's been around for weeks, faint. You'd get a whiff of it on the wind, then it'd be gone." Kowski and Perez shared a look. "Weeks. But this morning," Jerry continued, "it was different. I came in on my early round just after sunrise. The fog was thick, holding everything down. And the smell. It wasn't dead animal anymore. It was sweet, a chemical smell like bad wiring and spoiled milk. It was thick. It made my eyes water. It was just wrong, like I told the dispatcher. I just knew it wasn't a deer." Perez, the quiet one, finally spoke. "Did you ever see anyone near that truck, Jerry?" "Kids, partiers?" Jerry shook his head. "No, it's too far off the path. That's the old service loop. Hasn't been used in 10 years. The only people who go back there, well, who?" Kowski pressed. The ranger hesitated, his loyalty to his park and its inhabitants warring with the homicide detectives in his office. "We got regulars," Jerry said, his voice low. "Homeless folks. Vets, mostly. They live in the woods. We have an understanding. They stay out of sight, they don't cause trouble, we don't bother them." Kowski was motionless, his focus absolute. "Give me a name." "There's one," Jerry sighed. "An old-timer. We call him One-Eyed Jack. He's a Vietnam vet, I think, harmless, keeps to himself. His camp, his lean-to, It's in the south quadrant, maybe a quarter mile from that truck. Bingo. Kowski didn't smile, but his eyes lit up. A witness, maybe. How do we find him? Kowski demanded. You don't find Jack, Jerry said. He finds you. Or he doesn't. He knows these woods better than I do. He'll have seen your cars. He'll have heard the flatbed. He's probably long gone by now. We'll see, Kowski said. He clapped his notebook shut. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Don't talk to anyone. We'll be in touch. The three officers walked back out into the bright sunlight. The park suddenly felt much larger, the woods deeper. All right, Kowski said, pointing. Perez, you and I are going to find this one-eyed Jack. We'll start at the coordinates Jerry gave us. We find that camp. What about me? Riley asked. Kowski looked at him, then at Max. You and the dog are on containment and canvas. You take the east trail, loop back to the main path. I want every jogger, every dog walker, every bird watcher within a 2-mile radius of that scene. I want to know who they are, what they saw, and when they saw it. He gave Riley a hard look. The ME is going to give us the what. This homeless vet might give us the when, but somebody in this park. Somebody saw the who. Go find him, Riley. Riley nodded. Got it. The detectives split off, heading deep into the south quadrant woods. Riley adjusted Max's harness. All right, boy. Back to work. They began their patrol, but it wasn't a routine patrol anymore. Every person Riley saw, a woman pushing a stroller, 2 teenagers skipping school, was no longer a citizen. They were a potential lead. The hunt was on. The detectives, Kowski and Perez, disappeared into the dense, overgrown brush of the south quadrant, hunting for a ghost named One-Eyed Jack. Officer Riley was left with his own equally daunting task. He and Max began their canvass. He clicked Max's leash. All right, boy. Back to work. They started on the East Trail, a popular jogging loop that ran along a ridge overlooking the reservoir. In the span of an hour, the park had transformed. The perimeter tape was still up, a bright yellow scar in the woods, but normalcy was already creeping back in. Riley could hear the distant thwack of a tennis ball from the courts, the laughter of kids at the playground near the main entrance. Dog walkers were back, though they kept a wide, respectful distance from Riley and his formidable partner. This disconnect always felt strange. For Riley, the world had fundamentally shifted. That park, a place he'd known for 30 years, would forever be the place where the ice cream truck was found. For everyone else, it was just Tuesday. He saw a woman approaching, a jogger in her late 60s, her silver hair pulled back in a ponytail. She slowed to a walk as she saw Riley, her eyes flicking nervously to Max. Morning, officer, she said, giving him a wide berth. Morning, ma'am, Riley said, his voice polite, professional. Officer Riley, K-9 unit. Apologies for the disturbance this morning. I just have a few routine questions. Oh goodness, she said, her hand on her chest. Was it that old truck? I always knew that thing was an eyesore. Yes, ma'am. We're investigating the vehicle. We were wondering if you'd seen anyone near it recently. Anything suspicious at all? This morning or any time in the last few weeks. The woman's brow furrowed. She was a local, the kind of person who walked this path every single day, who noticed everything. She was the perfect witness. She thought for a long moment. Suspicious, well, there are always the homeless folks, of course, back in the woods, but they keep to themselves. I've never seen them near the truck, no. I can't say I have. I mean, I run this loop 5 days a week. It's always just there, part of the scenery. I'm sorry, officer. I didn't see a thing. Riley nodded, his disappointment a familiar dull ache. It was always like this. Thank you for your time, ma'am. Have a safe run. She nodded, gave Max one last appreciative look, and jogged on. Riley and Max continued their loop. He stopped 3 more people, a young man walking a golden retriever, and a couple in their 70s carrying binoculars for birdwatching. The story was the same. Nothing. 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 The truck had been there so long it had become invisible. A part of the landscape. Someone could have accessed it a dozen times and no one would have noticed. He and Max completed the 2-mile loop, ending up back at the staging area near the service road. It was empty now, save for his SUV and the detective's unmarked sedan. The tape fluttered. The scene was quiet, sterile. Riley sat on the heavy wooden picnic bench near the path, the one closest to where the truck had been. He unclipped a collapsible bowl from his belt and poured water for Max, who lapped it up gratefully. Riley just sat, his hands on his knees, and stared at the rectangular patch of mud. He was just a patrolman. A beat cop. His job was to respond, secure, and report. This was detective work. He should be clocking out, finishing his report, and trying to forget the smell. But he couldn't. He kept seeing the hand. The small, pale fingers. The glint of gold. This wasn't just a 1057. This was a desecration. A woman had been sealed in a child's toy like a message in a bottle and left to rot. He thought of the person who had called her wife. He thought of the family that must have wondered for years where she had gone. He felt the cold, hard anger from the freezer return. He wasn't a detective, but he had a partner with the best nose in the state, and he had a promise to keep. A rustling in the woods broke his thoughts. Kowski and Perez emerged from the tree line, and they did not look happy. They were covered in burrs, their polished detective's shoes caked in mud. Kowski's tie was completely undone, hanging around his neck like a noose. "Well?" Riley asked. "Zip," Perez said, snapping his notepad shut. "Nada, nothing." "The camp's there," Kowski growled, pulling a twig from his sleeve. "Just like the ranger said. A lean-to, a fire pit. But it's cold. Stone cold. He's been gone at least 12 hours. He ran?" Riley asked. "He didn't run. He vanished," Kowski corrected. "The place was swept. This one-eyed Jack isn't some drunk. He's a pro. He knew we were coming, or he knew it was time to leave. He took everything that mattered and buried the rest. He's in the wind, a dead end. The ranger, the joggers, and now the only potential witness. All of it a dead end. The case was already cold." The three men stood in a frustrated silence. The only sound was Max's panting, and then Kowski's cell phone buzzed. The sound was electric, jarring the heavy silence. Kowski snatched it from his belt. "Kowski," he listened. His hard, angry face went completely, utterly still. "Yeah, Doc," he said, his voice low. "Go ahead." He listened for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. He looked at Perez, then at Riley. His eyes were like chips of ice. "Say that again," Kowski commanded. He listened. He didn't speak. He just nodded slowly. "All right, yeah, we're on our way." He hung up without saying goodbye. "That was Dr. Aris," he said. "The medical examiner. What is it?" Riley asked, standing up. "Did she ID her?" "No," Kowski said. "She's still frozen. But they can't start the thaw until they identify the foreign objects. They did a full-body X-ray through the ice. And?" Perez pressed. Kowski looked at the patch of mud, his voice barely a whisper. "The ring? The one you saw, Riley. They got a clear shot of it. It had an inscription." Riley felt his heart hammer. "What did it say?" Kowski pulled out his own notebook. "Initials. AM to ER and a date." He locked eyes with Riley. June 5th, 1984, a 4-decade-old secret. Riley looked down at his partner, Max. The dog looked back, sensing the shift, ready for the next command. The case wasn't just cold. It was frozen in time. "We're going to find him, boy," Riley murmured, a quiet vow. "I don't care how long it takes. We're going to find him." Gyong noi chuyen sangamap, truk tiep kwangoy dan chuyen goy sangtao. Thank you so much for following this journey. We just finished the first chapter of the coldest case, but, as you can see, the real mystery is only just beginning. This story was built from an idea about a K9 and a discovery, and it has become a hunt for a ghost from 1984. We're going to stop here for today, but the investigation continues. And I have to ask you, the audience, as we go into the next part, what do you think the initials on the ring AM to ER stand for? And who or what do you think One-Eyed Jack really is? Let me know your theories in the comments below, and please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss part 9, when we find out who ER was. We'll see you next time.